Imagine that you're walking through the sands of ancient Egypt, the sun beating down on massive pyramids. The streets are alive with traders, priests, and workers, all moving under the watchful eye of the almighty Pharaoh. But behind the glory, behind the riches and the magnificent temples, lies a world far darker than you ever imagined. A world where people were buried alive, where the dead were feared and worshipped, and where even the simplest beliefs led to terrifying rituals. Ancient Egypt is often remembered for its breathtaking monuments and brilliant advances in art, medicine, and architecture. Many of them might seem unusual today, but they were completely normal in ancient Egyptian society. Normal to them. What if I told you that some of the most disturbing traditions weren't just myths, but real events that archaeologists and scientists have uncovered? For centuries, scholars have studied the incredible legacy of the Egyptian civilization. They weren't just building pyramids and painting beautiful hieroglyphs, they were also burying their servants alive, creating strange magical pregnancy tests, and even training wild baboons to hunt criminals. The Egyptians feared death more than anything, and they were willing to do almost anything to prepare for the afterlife. The things they did to honor their dead were sometimes more terrifying than death itself. They believed that if they didn't follow these strange, gruesome customs, the spirits of the dead would come back to haunt them. So they went to extreme lengths, mummifying cats, drinking strange potions, and even sleeping on stone pillows to keep evil spirits away. In the first dynasty circa 3100 to 2900 BCE, the death of a pharaoh wasn't just a royal affair, it was a mass execution. A ruler's loyal servants had no choice when he died. They were buried alive in his tomb, forced to serve him in the afterlife. Imagine standing in a dark chamber, the heavy stone door sealing shut, as the last breath of air is taken from you. This wasn't a horror story, it was real life. Archaeologists have discovered mass graves surrounding the tombs of early pharaohs, filled with dozens of sacrificed men, women, and even animals. Ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife identical to the real world. If a pharaoh needed servants in life, he would need them in death. For several dynasties, this brutal practice persisted until Ushabti figurines, tiny statues that symbolically replaced real people, supplanted it. But for those who lived in the early days of Egypt's empire, being close to power meant living in fear of a deadly loyalty test. From the 18th dynasty circa 1550 to 1295 BCE to the fall of Cleopatra in 30 BCE, pharaohs followed a tradition that would horrify modern science. They married their own siblings. Why? Because they believed their bloodline was divine. Anxing with ordinary people would dilute their sacred power. Take King Tutankhamun, 1341 to 1323 BCE, one of the most famous pharaohs of all time. DNA tests on his mummy revealed the horrifying consequences of centuries of inbreeding. He suffered from severe physical deformities, a clubfoot, a cleft palate, and a series of genetic disorders that left him weak and dependent on a cane at just 19 years old. His parents? His parents are brothers and sisters. And King Tut wasn't alone. Ramses II, Akhenaten, and even Cleopatra were part of this tradition. While it helped them keep power within their family, it came with a terrible cost: genetic diseases, birth defects, and weakened rulers who died young. In the desperate attempt to hold on to power, the royal bloodline became its own worst enemy. Unlike modern kings and presidents, a pharaoh's word was absolute. There were no trials or debates, only orders and consequences. Accusations of betraying the ruler not only led to your execution, but also to your erasure from existence. Your name was chiseled off monuments, your image removed from paintings, and your body destroyed so your soul could never reach the afterlife. Remember to join our community by subscribing to this channel. One of the most famous victims of this was Hatshepsut, 1507 to 1458 BCE, one of the few female pharaohs. After her death, her stepson Thutmose III ordered her name and face erased from history as if she had never existed. This wasn't just an act of revenge, It was a fate worse than death. Egyptians believed that without a name or a memory, the soul would wander in darkness forever. Other punishments were equally terrifying. Thieves had their noses cut off, betrayers were buried alive, and those who spoke against the pharaoh faced brutal executions. Power in ancient Egypt was not just about control, it was about fear. But even pharaohs, the most powerful men on earth, were not safe from divine punishment. They believed that if they failed to uphold order, the gods would curse them, their people, and their afterlife. Some rulers like Akhenaten, 1353 to 1336 BCE, tried to defy tradition and paid the ultimate price. He abandoned the old gods and declared that Egypt would worship only one deity, the sun god Aten. His radical reforms angered the powerful priests who had controlled religious power for centuries. After his death, they destroyed his statues, erased his temples, and nearly forgot his name. Ancient Egypt was more than just a land of powerful rulers and grand pyramids. It was a civilization built on the fear of the unknown. Every law, every tradition and sacrifice revolved around pleasing the gods and avoiding their wrath. And for the people of Egypt, the afterlife was not just a dream, it was their greatest obsession. Ancient Egyptians didn't just worship a handful of gods. They had over 2,000 deities, each one responsible for different aspects of life, death, and nature. From Ra, the sun god who fought against chaos every night, to Osiris, the ruler of the underworld, their entire existence depended on these divine beings. But these gods weren't merciful. They demanded strict obedience, and their punishments were terrifying. One of the most feared gods was Anubis, the jackal-headed deity of the dead. His role was to weigh the hearts of the deceased against the feather of truth. If your heart was too heavy with sin, it would be devoured by Amit, a horrifying beast with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of a hippo. This entailed complete annihilation, the erasure of your soul from existence, a destiny exceeding even death. For the ancient Egyptians, death was just the beginning. They believed that when you died, your soul had to pass through the Duat, the underworld, a terrifying realm filled with monstrous creatures, deadly traps, and impossible challenges. To survive, you needed protection, and that's why the Book of the Dead was created. This sacred text contained spells, instructions, and rituals to help the deceased navigate the afterlife and reach paradise. But only those who had lived righteously were allowed to enter Aru, the field of reeds, a paradise where the soul would live forever in eternal happiness. Those who failed the trials of the underworld were doomed to oblivion, lost in eternal darkness, or devoured by the gods. The gods were not forgiving, and failing to honor them could lead to disasters. Neglecting a temple, failing to make proper offerings, or harming sacred animals resulted in swift and merciless punishment. Entire cities were said to have suffered plagues, starvation, and war as a result of the gods' anger. Even the pharaohs were not safe. Akhenaten, 1353 to 1336 BCE, tried to erase Egypt's many gods and replace them with just one, the sun god Aten. His decision led to chaos. After his death, the priests of the old gods destroyed his statues, erased his name from history, and restored the old traditions. His radical attempt to change Egypt's faith cost him everything, even his memory. The Egyptians believed that some animals were physical forms of gods, and harming them was one of the greatest crimes imaginable. Cats, for example, were seen as sacred creatures associated with Bastet, the goddess of protection. Killing a cat, even by accident, was punishable by death. The same went for crocodiles, associated with the god Sobek, and ibises, linked to Thoth, the god of wisdom. Some animals were mummified alongside humans and buried in sacred tombs. Archaeologists have discovered thousands of mummified cats, dogs, birds, and even bulls, each carefully preserved to serve their owners in the afterlife. Religion wasn't just about temples and prayers, it influenced every moment of daily life. Egyptians wore protective amulets, chanted magical spells, and followed strict purification rituals to keep the gods happy. They had to ensure they followed the sacred laws before eating, before sleeping, and before speaking certain words. For the average person, every action had consequences, and one wrong move could mean disaster. They believed that even speaking the name of the dead could bring their spirit back, and not all spirits were friendly. Ghosts of the angry and unburied were said to haunt the living, seeking revenge for being forgotten. Ancient Egypt's religion, despite its beauty and complexity, was based on fear. Fear encompassed fear of punishment, fear of the unknown, and fear of the gods. Every temple, every offering and prayer was meant to protect the people from disaster and ensure their souls would be safe after death. Egyptians were some of the earliest people to study the human body, diseases, and treatments. They left behind some of the first medical texts in history, including the Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, circa 1600 BCE, both filled with medical knowledge that was thousands of years ahead of its time. Yet, their fear of the supernatural led them to believe that sickness had mystical origins, which meant that curing an illness required not only medicine, but also divine intervention. Surprisingly, Egyptian physicians were skilled surgeons. They knew how to set broken bones, stitch wounds, and even perform brain surgery. Researchers have discovered mummies with healed fractures, demonstrating the success of some surgeries. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes surgical treatments for head injuries, spinal damage, and even tumors, showing that Egyptian doctors understood the importance of observation and hands-on treatment. But not all surgeries were life-saving. Some procedures were terrifying and painful, with no anesthesia beyond opium or fermented beer. Patients had to endure primitive operations with sharpened obsidian blades, and if they survived the surgery, infection was almost certain due to the lack of sterilization. For the ancient Egyptians, medicine was not just about treating the body, it was about fighting unseen forces. Many believed that angry gods, curses, or spirits caused diseases, leading doctors, often priests, to combine medicine with prayers, spells, and amulets. Are you enjoying the story? Support our channel by clicking the subscribe button. Blindness, believed to be a punishment from the god Horus, was one of the most feared diseases. To cure it, Egyptian doctors would mix honey, crushed minerals, and even crocodile dung into an eye salve while chanting protective spells. For centuries, Egyptian doctors widely used this mix, which likely caused more infections than cures. Another common belief was that demons could enter a person's body and make them sick. To drive out the spirits, healers used foul-smelling potions made of garlic, moldy bread, and animal fat. Substances that, ironically, contained antibacterial properties, showing that some treatments accidentally worked. One of the most bizarre yet scientifically impressive medical practices in ancient Egypt was their pregnancy test. Women would urinate on barley and wheat seeds and wait to see which one sprouted first. If the barley grew, it meant she was carrying a boy. If the wheat grew, it meant a girl. If nothing sprouted, she wasn't pregnant. Modern scientists tested this method in the 1960s and found that it was surprisingly accurate, about 70% correct. This was because hormones in a pregnant woman's urine can stimulate plant growth. Even without understanding the science behind it, Egyptian healers were using early forms of experimentation thousands of years ago. Not all medical practices were meant to heal. Some medical practices aimed to punish or eliminate enemies. Egyptians were skilled in using deadly plants and venoms, mixing potions that could kill silently. Some poisons were so powerful that even handling them could be lethal. Pharaohs and high-ranking officials sometimes used these poisons to remove political threats, disguising them as medicine. Some ancient texts suggest that Cleopatra experimented with toxins to find the most painless way to die, eventually choosing the bite of an asp snake. Beyond poisons, the Egyptians also believed that words alone could harm. The Egyptians believed that a written curse could lead to illness, madness, or even death. Some tomb inscriptions warn that anyone who disturbs the dead will suffer eternal torment. And eerily enough, many archaeologists who ignored these warnings later suffered mysterious deaths. With a diet full of gritty bread and unprocessed grains, Egyptians suffered from terrible dental problems. Researchers have discovered mummies with cracked, infected, and abscessed teeth, indicating a widespread issue with dental pain, but their solutions were far from comforting. Egyptian dentists treated cavities with honey and herbs, sometimes sealing holes with resin or clay. But when a tooth was beyond saving, there was only one solution: extraction with no pain relief. Some desperate patients had their teeth drilled to relieve pressure, a process as painful as it sounds. Perhaps the most advanced and terrifying aspect of Egyptian medicine was mummification. More than just preserving bodies, it was an intricate process of science, ritual, and belief in the afterlife. The embalmers, considered sacred, used surgical precision to remove organs, drain fluids, and preserve the dead with natron salt. Their knowledge of human anatomy was so advanced that it took Western medicine thousands of years to catch up. However, the process wasn't always perfect. Errors in the embalming process have left some mummies half-preserved, burned, or even mutilated. These mistakes led to fears of the undead, with Egyptians believing that improperly buried souls would rise from the grave to seek revenge. Despite their strange and sometimes horrifying methods, the medical knowledge of ancient Egypt laid the foundation for future civilizations. Their texts influenced Greek, Roman, and even modern medicine. They understood the power of natural remedies, experimented with early surgical techniques, and, without realizing it, developed treatments that modern science later proved to be effective. At the pinnacle of society was the pharaoh, a ruler who was considered more than just a king. He was a living god. His wealth and power were beyond comprehension. The palaces of the pharaohs were marble-clad fortresses, decorated with rare gems, imported woods, and intricate golden carvings. Every aspect of their life was a demonstration of their divine status. Egyptian royalty never lifted a finger. They were bathed, perfumed, and dressed by attendants. Silk robes, bejeweled collars, and headdresses, adorned with lapis lazuli, were everyday attire. Servants fanned them with giant ostrich feather fans, and musicians played soothing melodies as they feasted. Defeasted. From all corners of the empire, roasted meats, fresh fruits, honey cakes, and wine, imported from the Mediterranean, were consumed. While the common people barely had enough to eat, the elite dined on exotic game, figs, and sweet breads infused with spices that were worth more than gold. But their obsession with luxury went beyond food and fashion. Queen Cleopatra bathed in donkey milk to keep her skin smooth. The wealthiest nobles slept on gilded beds with plush linen, while incense and essential oils filled their chambers with intoxicating scents. They lived as gods on earth, but their extravagance came at a horrifying cost. While the elite reveled in unimaginable comfort, the laborers and slaves who built their world suffered unthinkable hardship. Contrary to popular belief, not all pyramid builders were slaves. Many were skilled laborers, but their conditions were brutal nonetheless. These workers hauled massive limestone blocks weighing several tons under the merciless Egyptian sun, often until their bodies gave out from exhaustion. For these laborers, life was short and punishing. Archaeological evidence from workers' tombs near the pyramids has revealed shattered bones, arthritis, and severe spinal damage, proof of the unimaginable strain they endured. Many died young, their bodies discarded without ceremony, while the pharaoh's tomb, built on their sweat and suffering, was filled with gold, jewels, and statues meant to follow him into the afterlife. Food for the lower classes was scarce and simple, mainly bread, onions, and beer, a far cry from the lavish feasts of the elite. Some lived in cramped mud brick homes, with barely any protection from the heat or flooding of the Nile. Disease and malnutrition were rampant, and access to medical treatment was a privilege reserved for the wealthy. The lower classes suffered, while the rulers amassed fortunes beyond comprehension. If you're enjoying this story, consider clicking Super Thanks. Your support is helping us uncover more hidden secrets, explore deeper mysteries, and bring you even more incredible topics like this. At the very bottom of the social pyramid were the enslaved people, prisoners of war, criminals, and debtors forced into a lifetime of servitude, suffering, and humiliation. Unlike paid laborers, these individuals were seen as property, with no rights, no voice, and no hope of freedom. They often took women and children as slaves, forcing them to serve in noble households or endure grueling conditions in temples and quarries. Becoming a slave in the mines of the Eastern Desert, or Sinai, where they extracted gold and turquoise, was one of the worst fates. The heat was unbearable. The air filled where was dust, and many never made it out alive. Ancient records reveal that slave owners had complete control over life and death, and punishments were as cruel as they were frequent. Beatings, starvation, and forced labor until collapse were common forms of discipline. Even in death, the disparity remained. In this world of stark contrasts, clothing, jewelry, and personal care were more than just vanity. They were status symbols that determined one's place in society. Elites covered themselves in gold and precious stones, while commoners wore simple linen tunics and slaves barely had enough clothing to cover themselves. Thank you for joining the community by subscribing to this channel. Until the next video.